We are going to get started. I'm so thrilled to have you here today for this webinar that's entitled Build a Research Agenda that will transform your association, or simply how to use your research better, how to get more out of it, make sure it's actionable, make sure it's really driving the outcomes that you're looking for out of these efforts. Before we get started, I do want to introduce our speakers today, myself and my colleague Candace, who will be talking through a couple different sections of our content with you. And I want to give you an intro in a way that ties our backgrounds to this content, this topic that we're talking about. I'm Patrick Glazier. I am the head of McKinley Advisors Research and Insights and Business Transformation Practice Areas. I've been doing this for about 15 years for associations through my work with McKinley. But even before that, I worked at the Marketing Research Association. And during that time in my professional career, I had really started encountering some of the issues that we'll be talking about today. I remember the first time I had heard the expression survey madness, for example, was back then. And it was in the context of just so many surveys, so many research efforts being done that clients, for-profit organizations at that time were really struggling with their response rates and just keeping engagement and all of the things that they were doing. So these issues that you may have experienced in your own work through research, whether you do it yourself or you use it as part of your association, are universal. They affect organizations that are associations as well as any other type. And they're really solvable. It just takes a little bit of intention, and we'll be talking about that today. Candace, would you like to give an intro for yourself?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Hi, everybody. My name is Candace Vanderpool. I am a practice director on our research and insights team at McKinley. I spent over 11 years with McKinley helping associations use research to drive their strategy. And before that, I was actually doing institutional research at a pharmaceutical association. And something that I was a bit of a, not shock, but a change for me is when moving from this pharmaceutical association to working with a variety of organizations was just some of the challenges that groups faced in conducting their research. So at that previous organization, things were very structured, they were cyclical, they happened with a purpose, and there was a clear reason for conducting that research. But that's not always the case from what I've experienced and encountered with groups. And so some of those common challenges around data collection being sort of disjointed, not shared across different departments, sort of kept in silos, or really large scale, broad research efforts that are going out to every single member or stakeholder in an organization are things that can be real hindrances in making sure that the data folks are collecting is actually useful and really leading to data-driven decisions. So as Patrick mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit today through some of those challenges, how to overcome them, and some real strategies for how to move along your data maturity and really get you to a place where your decisions are data-driven.
Thank you, Candace. And all of those topics you brought up are things that we're going to surface for you today. And really, I think part and parcel to the work that associations do. We hear this kind of challenge all the time. So we have a couple of sections of our presentation that we want to talk you through in a couple of different ways to tackle these kinds of problems. What I also want to let you know is that towards the end, we're going to have what we're calling a fireside chat, which is really a chance for us all to have a discussion about, what are you encountering in your work that you could use some guidance on or sounding board on. And what I just want to encourage you to do is to use the Q&A function. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen to offer any questions you have, and do it throughout the presentation. Candace and I are going to be looking at that, and it'll help us kind of tailor our content to you. But if we don't get to it while we're going through our slides, we will make sure to surface that question that you have as part of our chat at the end of this webinar as well. So there's two main portions, two angles that we want to take on this issue that you all are experiencing. The first one is what we're calling data maturity. And this is really a little bit more about an organizational perspective towards these issues. And the reason that we're going to start there is that if you're not thinking about your organization and its relationship to research, in other words, the way that you plan for different research efforts, the way that you develop a culture around using research and making people comfortable with using research, the way that you coordinate. If you don't do those things, if you don't at least have a little bit of a exercise in thinking about them, then it's really going to thwart your efforts when you get to that little that more tactical level where you're thinking about like your research agenda or the specific efforts that you might be interested in pursuing. So we really want to be thinking at this on multiple levels to make sure you're getting the most out of your research program. So now, why data maturity, or why did we create a data maturity model as a part of this? Well, for one, knowing where you are in your journey is going to help you think through how to move to higher levels of maturity and tackle some of those things that I was just mentioning a minute ago. We had sent along an assessment so that you could kind of figure out where you are today. And some of you have taken this and filled it out and know where you are based on that assessment. Others of you, if you may have registered more recently, did not receive that, or if you never took the chance to fill it out, don't have those results in hand. But I am going to talk through those different levels of data maturity for you. And so we're going to get to a point where we'll put up a poll question, and you can fill out where you are in your journey. If you haven't taken the assessment in an official way, just listen to how I'm describing the different levels and take a guess at where you are. That'll help us kind of think through where we should be focusing our conversation today. So for the most part, when we think about associations, at least in my experience, associations really realize the value of data and research in the work that they do. This isn't the case in every industry if you move over to the for-profit sector, but I think that there's actually a real culture around research and being data-driven in the association world. I'm sure all of you can think of different times this has surfaced for you in your conversations internally, and then maybe as you've participated in industry events. ASAE's 7 Measures of Success, which was published 15, 20 years ago, had being data-driven as one of the top measures of success. When I go in and I talk to clients, there's a real desire to use data to its fullest. But despite that, despite the belief that you can use data to measure KPIs and know how you're performing against your mission, the fact that you can use it to understand how you're doing in terms of your performance and how your members feel about you, or that you can use it to generate ideas for a new product, associations still struggle to get the most out of it. And sometimes they become frustrated with research and data and begin to lose a little bit of faith in it. The problems that Candace had mentioned a little bit earlier when she was introducing herself are they run the spectrum in terms of the types of challenges, whether they're more at the organizational level or more at an individual research effort level. And that's one thing just to get our minds around, that if you're really going to do the most with your research and with your data, that there's a couple of different places that you need to be looking at it. And in my experience, there's certainly a little bit of associations that have trouble with the data collection piece of it. That it's hard to write a survey, for example, or know how to do a focus group the right way. It takes a certain skill set to take data and analyze it and make actionable results out of it. But one of the more challenging things that I don't think is talked about a lot is that organizational perspective. And that's really why we're doing the focus on data models, data maturity models right now. When you think about the organizational maturity element of it, it's, it encompasses everything from whether or not your organization is planning the investments that it needs to in the right places so that you're not doing more research than you need to and, burning your members out on the opportunity to participate in research. It means, thinking about how to actually produce actionable data that's measured in the right way so that your surveys are valid, for example, and that once you get those results back, you know how to have a conversation around that data. It means creating a culture so that if you're thinking about creating a new product, your staff are coming and they're coming with a business case about whatever product they're recommending and saying, we know that our members want this, that it fulfills a need because we've collected that data. And those are all organizational components to maturity. So what we find often is that there's three broad areas. You could think about this as a little bit more nuanced than three areas, but this is a good mental model for thinking about where you might be in your own journey as an organization. Now, the first is what I'm calling low data maturity. And this is, this is an association that might not collect data or research at all. It might be very new in its journey. It might complete a survey, for example, every few years, but it's not an organization that really believes a heck of a lot in using research and using it to guide day-to-day decisions. And you might hear expressions like, we don't need to know, we don't need to collect data in order to know what our members think. We know what they think. We've been working with them so long. We have really good intuition. Those are kind of intuitive perspectives towards what your members actually think. And, they can be really dangerous because as an association staffer, you're very close to certain sets of members and you have a certain relationship to the things that are going on that rank and file members don't have. Your volunteer leaders have the same kind of inherent bias, that they have a little bit of a different perspective. So it doesn't take too long before you run into a decision where you might not be that close to the truth about how your membership as a whole feels. And then it just takes one or two bad decisions that can really throw you off in terms of the implications of not having data-driven. I suspect that since you're all on this call, you're all on this webinar, you might be beyond low data maturity. You might be at a data-informed level. But if you're not, that's okay. Your principal challenge at that point is really making a case for why data is needed and getting people comfortable with it. Data-informed is where a lot of associations live, in my experience. And I think this really gets back to the culture of data in the association world. This has a lot to do with organizations that do regular kinds of research, and they bring that research into their conversations. You might do a needs assessment every couple of years. You might do a lot of surveys. Most associations do this in a way where each department is sort of figuring out their own needs and running their own surveys. And for some associations, that works really well. You're ultimately able to get what you want out of that data, and you're using it for decisions that are important for you. But a lot of the time, what ends up happening in practice is that associations get really frustrated with their data and their research program. What ends up happening is, and again, this can hit on different levels that we're going to talk about fairly quickly. But what can happen is that since research efforts aren't really prioritized at the organizational level, you have many different departments that are each doing their own surveys, essentially whenever they have the bandwidth to do it or whenever they might see the need. And you end up doing very many surveys that starts to affect your stakeholders, whether your members or beyond that. You start to hear those complaints. You start to feel that as an association. And at the same time, your different departments are collecting redundant information. What I believe through my research can sometimes conflict with what someone in another department believes. And it's because we're conducting research using different measures and interpreting them in different ways. And so there begins to be this frustration about, we have too many data points. We don't really know what any of it means. We're not learning as an organization. And then you get into the data quality, where you have individuals that might have very little familiarity with data and research and collecting it in a good, valid way. And the quality doesn't end up being very good. And so these departments end up struggling to find actionable intelligence, and that creates frustration. And then you get down the line to those more larger organizational challenges, and the organization doesn't have a really strong culture around how to digest and make decisions off of this information. So even if you're feeling good about the research that you're doing, and you're collecting it, and you feel like you're doing it in a good, strong, valid way, and you're getting actionable data, what then ends up happening is sometimes you take it and you meet together as a team to talk about the implications, and you don't really have a lot of muscle around making decisions off of it. So it ends up going nowhere, and that becomes a frustration, and you begin to believe less in your ability to actually use data. That can happen all in that data-informed category, and it's so many of the conversations that I've had with professionals over the years that have tried to use data to its best, highest use. I want to distinguish those two components, those two levels against data optimized. Now, in a data optimized association, an organization has found its way through those challenges. And the thing that I want to stress the most to you is that the challenges for you as an association could be different than the challenges for another association. And so while I'm talking about a handful of different kinds of issues that can pop up, they might not actually affect your organization. It might just be one or two of those. And so whenever you're talking about correcting for something like that and really optimizing your research program or your data program, it's really about taking a step back and looking at what's affecting you and what you need to correct for, and doing the one or two or three things that are really going to optimize it for you. And that's how you don't create too much structure, don't create too much process, and make sure that you're essentially right-sizing for your organization. A data-optimized organization might look like a group that's done that work, that has figured out the specific problems for them, and maybe it gets to some of those issues I just talked about. It might be the case that they've figured out their staff don't feel strong in collecting data, designing research, interpreting data. We all know not everybody really takes to charts and to data and to research. It doesn't speak to them necessarily. And so a data optimized organization may supply that department with an individual resource, and a person on staff who knows how to do this work and is there as a resource for them. Or maybe they have a centralized department that does it for them. Or maybe they utilize a vendor like McKinley Advisors to collect the data for them. In any way that they do it, they're helping to address that problem and making sure their staff are comfortable with what's collected and can interpret results. They may be very strategic in the research efforts that they're doing. So they're coordinating at a high level, in terms of decision-making capacity for the organization, and saying, we're not going to do 15 surveys this year, and each department is sort of creating their own adventure. We're going to come up with the 3 or 4 things that are most important for us to look at, prioritize those, and we can push some of the other things to a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road. And by doing that, we're going to all get behind the most pressing priorities for the association. We're all going to know what's collected, and we're going to have a conversation about what it means, as opposed to literally countless research efforts going on that nobody really can get their arms around. And maybe they've taken a step further. They've figured out a way to share the information that they've collected and have a conversation as an organization around it, so that everybody is kind of learning together. They don't need to keep asking the same things year in and year out. They may have prioritized innovation. We talk a lot today about organizations, associations needing to be agile because the world is changing so quickly. So do associations in order to do their best work. Perhaps they've recognized the need to create new products and services, and their staff are going to be a key part of that, and they want their staff to be data-driven. So they give them a template to use that they need to fill out that speaks to, yes, we've collected data and members want this, and we've looked at financial data and we can make a pro forma. And they're really building a culture around people becoming comfortable presenting data to leadership, and that itself spills over so that it's reinforcing itself. And you're not just having levels of frustration that I've done a great job in collecting something, but it never goes anywhere. So those are the hallmarks out of a data optimized association. I want to hear where you all are, though. So we're going to pull up a quick poll, and then we're going to talk more about how to move from one level to the next. So if you took our assessment, fill this out. If you didn't, think about what I just shared with you and tell us whether you're low data maturity, whether you feel like you might be in that data informed class, or if you feel like you've made it to data optimized. And we'll keep this open for just a minute so you have a chance to fill that out. Okay. And let's close this out. We'll have results back. Yeah. So a lot in the data informed category, few in the data optimized. What we have is the three tiers here. The lion's share, a strong majority, 78%, are considered to be data informed, what I just mentioned. And again, that doesn't mean you're necessarily frustrated with where you are today, but you may have experienced some symptoms of that. About 20% are low data maturity, and then very few are data optimized, which is a hard state to get to. Or at least it's hard if you haven't started contemplating some of the challenges and started working at some of those solutions. Okay. So what we find really is that there's three pillars of transformation. And again, we could talk about what an ideal association looks like, but the ideal association doesn't really exist in real life. You're not going to have all of your ducks in the row. And we are complex organizations that deal with lots of different people, internal and out. It's messy work. And so it's really about being better tomorrow than you are today. I think of this as change management, because that's what it's really about. It's getting the folks in your environment, in your ecosystem, to change their relationship to data and how we work with it. And so I've presented the pillars of transformation in that vein. And the first thing that I'll do is tell you stakeholder input is critical, because whether you're in that low data maturity or if you're in data informed, the first thing that you need to know is the perspective of all of the staff and even leaders in the association and how they begin to think about data. If you're low data maturity and around 20% are, your principal task here is to talk to people and understand a couple of things from them. You want to know how they feel about data and its ability to help the association. You want to know what their priorities are. And you want to collect this information so that you can begin to make a case internally about why it's really important for us to start to be data-driven. And here are the steps that we need to take to get there. And when I do this kind of work, and I've been hired by associations to help them move from one level to the next, I don't stop at just department heads. I oftentimes talk to staff within departments that have varying responsibilities. And I'll also talk to leaders, volunteer leaders, because having that conversation oftentimes surfaces a lot of really creative ideas about what data can do and can give you the ability to have a conversation around, hey, we should do more of this and we should do it in a very structured and intentional way. It's worth it for us because it's such a great analytical tool that can reduce our business risk, that can do all these great things for us. And here are some examples of that from all of us. That's if you're low data maturity. If you're data informed, I would make the case to you that it's, yes, of course, learning about priorities, but you also want to ask people about their pain points, because whether you feel like it's really a struggle for you right now, being data-driven, or if you feel as though you're doing pretty well, that's, again, an N of one, as we say in the research world. And you could really take some time to learn from people about their own particular pain points in the process. And so what you're doing is listening here to understand, I don't need to change everything. I just need to find where our staff are struggling the most and begin to make some tweaks to that so we can move a little bit further. And when we move further, that's the first step. And we'll do this again and again and bring people along with us over time. So it really all begins with stakeholder input. And some of those areas, I just mentioned them a minute ago, that you're going to really want to think about are how you want to centralize or not your function. This is key because if you have a centralized function, maybe that's a department, or maybe it is an individual who is responsible for all of the research, or maybe it's a vendor, then you could really begin to handle a lot of the coordination of all of the efforts that are going on. This might not feel right for you, though. And again, you have to know the culture in your own association. If staff today have a lot of freedom and your association is very non-hierarchical, flat, everybody kind of works in an entrepreneurial way, it might not make a heck of a lot of sense to centralize it. That might really go against the grain for you. So an alternative there is perhaps you have someone that can be a resource and can help coordinate efforts. They can kind of keep tabs on what's going on where. They can give advice on how to create good instruments, give feedback into it. They can record the information that you learn and begin to make sure it's shared out around the association staff so that it is something that you're learning from. So you have different ways of doing this, but it really comes down to what problem are you solving for and how are you doing it in a way that fits with your culture. Other things you're going to want to listen for are, do we need quality standards? You know, do we, for example, are our surveys way too long? And do we need to establish some best practices around this or that? When data is collected, where does it live? You know, are people struggling to find the research and the data that they need? Are they referencing different data points that's creating conflict when it's presented to leadership? Are these things that are surfacing in your conversations? And is there a lack of prioritization? You know, how is research actually decided, and could it be coordinated at a higher level so that you're really identifying the first fundamental question you need to have answered? You expect that to raise new questions for you, and you're going to go from there. Candace will talk more about this in just a minute. And the last two I'll go by kind of quickly here. Research strategy. So like anything in our world, strategy is just so important. You're going to want to know and start from the point of, what data do we need? Let's ask people that when we're doing our stakeholder interviews, because if you just start out from the point of view of, we need a research program and we're going to empower everyone to be able to get the data that they're interested in, but you don't really have an idea of why you're doing it, your efforts will fall short as well. And people will begin to not have a really crystal clear understanding of how do all these pieces fit together and provide us with clarity going forward. One thing I will mention to you, though, is that there are strategic kinds of data, and then, of course, there's tactical kinds of data. Strategic being, you know, how do we see around corners as an association and know where to take this organization? Tactical could be, how did our event run, and what are the specific things that we need to do to make people happier with it? And they both have a lot of value. I would surface this for you because people at different levels are going to value different kinds of information, and we need to be listening for how do we have everybody's needs met, and do that in a way that we're not creating too much noise in the environment, too many research efforts. Last thing I'll mention is data collection and governance. It's really important just to think through some of these issues of data governance. And some of the core areas you'll want to think about are where the information is stored, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But people need to be able to access it, and the right people need to. Today, we worry a lot about privacy. And if you're collecting information from your stakeholders, we need to think about what we're telling them in terms of, we're going to keep your data confidential, and make sure that we're living by that, and that it's protected. And that involves everything from thinking through your privacy policy to figuring out how you're going to store that information and what is shareable internally versus to leaders, volunteer leaders, versus to the public as a whole. With that, technology can be helpful. And we will talk in just a minute about your options there. So before we move to research agenda, there is a couple of hints here that I want to leave you with when you think about the particular issues that you might be facing in moving along your data maturity journey. The first is around the people in your organization. I mentioned before, data doesn't come naturally to everyone, and that's completely understandable. But to get to a place where you might want to go, where your decisions are really supported in the right data, and you're not just having conversations that at worst are people misinterpreting bad data and drawing too much evidence from it that isn't really there. Or at best, they might be inauthentic about their collection of data, where we've done the work, we think we're being data driven, but really we're having a conversation and we're not really basing our decisions on data. If you want to get beyond all of that and you want to have an honest, candid conversation around data, you need to help people get there and help them understand what that looks like. And for a lot of the people in your organization, it's going to feel really new to them and probably uncomfortable. So you can practice at this as an organization by building it into your everyday and signaling it from a leadership perspective. This is where you want to go. And that could be everything from sharing data points at a meeting and saying, let's have a conversation around this. What does this mean to you? To doing something like creating templates, like I had mentioned before. So it's really great that you have an idea for the association. Let's go and ground that in data. And here are a few things that I want you to make sure you have access to before you suggest this to leadership. So, what do members think about this? And what does the financials look like? Get them to start practicing at it and support them while they're doing it. And that'll help people come along with you. We talked about process. It's really important just to think about how you're going to support people, because it is really easy to collect data. And I will tell you, as someone who trained for it academically and has done this throughout my career, there's just 1,000 decisions that you make on any given research project. And if you don't have at least some familiarity with that, that's where you get those surveys where you feel like, oh, this really didn't get us what we need, or I don't really believe in it. The last is technology. So there's a lot of technology options for you out there. I would argue to you that you do not need to go all in on technology, particularly in the beginning. So you have all sorts of data you have access to from your database, the research you might be doing, through your social media, whatever it is. And you can go out and have something custom built for you. You can build it internally, something that pulls all these data points together. You can get technology like Tableau or something that's widely available. These can be difficult to manage, particularly if you don't have a lot of muscle around using data to begin with. And what can oftentimes happen is that you can invest a lot of money into these opportunities and then decide, oh no, we've over-engineered this and we actually want to make some changes to it. But then making those changes can become really onerous and expensive. I worked for a really large scientific society a couple of years ago, and they decided, we don't want to do all of that. What we would rather do is just make a simple PowerPoint with the core findings around what people think of us. And we want to update that every year and share it out to all of our staff and make sure that we are learning as a big team about what we believe about this association. And that was fine. It was a very low cost, low effort opportunity in a way that kept people up to date about the critical findings. So we talked a little bit about the overarching cultural and organizational things. Candace is going to lead us through what it looks like when you actually start to think about the granular, what do your research efforts look like?
Thanks, Patrick. Before we really dive into this, I want to put up another poll question. And this we're going to ask around how frequently your association is conducting structured research to help inform your decision making. So if you could on the poll. There it is. Just tell us where you fall. Are you an organization that is conducting your research on a regular basis, multiple surveys or research efforts happening throughout the year? Is this more of an annual or biannual process? Or are you more in that camp of, we don't really have any structured research. We'll maybe send out a survey every few years, but there's nothing there's no timeline, there's no set structure around how that information is getting collected. And I'll give you all just a minute to respond to that. Okay. All right. If we could see the results of that. Perfect. Okay. So we're seeing folks sort of spread out here. About 44% are conducting research on a regular basis, so multiple times per year going out with research. And then we see about a quarter each that are falling into the annual or every couple of years, and a few folks that also don't really have any sort of structured research efforts. So thank you for answering that. That is going to be very helpful as we sort of walk through what this research agenda can look like. So when we say research agenda, what does that mean? We're really talking about a structured framework for helping your organization to make data-driven decisions. And as Patrick has sort of alluded to throughout his discussions, we really see that associations often struggle with sort of more scattered research efforts. Either different departments are doing different things at different times, information's not being shared across departments. They may be asking exactly the same questions, but getting different responses to those because they're conducting it at different times. There's really no structure. And even as many of you mentioned, you may be doing research that is happening on a regular timeline. So you're doing it annually or every couple of years. What may not be incorporated into that sort of structure is what exactly it is that the research is focusing on. So what are the topics that you're going out to? Who are the audiences that you're going out to? And obviously, based on how often you all are conducting some of this research, you understand the value of that stakeholder input. We know that getting the perceptions of your members and your larger stakeholder groups is really important to understand where the organization needs to go. What are the things that they should be focusing on? Are there new opportunities, innovative things that your organization could be working on right now, that you get that information from your stakeholders? But if it's not structured in a way where that we're getting that rich data that really leads to actionable results and actionable insights, it may not be making its way into your decision making as an organization. And that is where there may be some disconnect, and how a research agenda can really help you sort of connect the dots all the way through that process. So what we're talking about with a research agenda, what it typically looks like when an organization doesn't really have an agenda set in place currently, is surveys that are happening too infrequently. The surveys typically are really large and broad. They're asking questions across a variety of different topics, and usually are asking for a lot of time out of your members and stakeholders. So they're really unfocused. And what a research agenda can do is move you towards being more continuous, so collecting data more often, but really focusing that research and that data collection, making sure that what you're collecting is focused on your highest strategic priorities in the moment. And that can change throughout the course of the agenda, which we'll talk about in a minute. But really making sure that how you're collecting the information, what information you're collecting, who you're going out to, and all of those things are aligned and focused on the organizational priorities for your association. So this is a look at what we might suggest for a research agenda, particularly if you don't have anything in place right now for how to structure your research. This looks over a 3-year span. And I want to emphasize that, this is really a starting point. So depending on where your organization is, and as Patrick mentioned earlier, you may have different struggles or frustrations that you're experiencing. And so you may be able to, if you're a little bit further along on your data maturity journey, maybe you're sort of in the year 2 bucket here, and that's where you can start and move forward. But for groups that are starting sort of from a baseline, don't really have any sort of structure around their research, this is what we would ultimately suggest starting with. So that looks like in year 1, you're really building your foundation. This is where you are looking at what are your organization's strategic goals and strategic priorities, and how can we collect information that gives us the data and information that we need to help answer any questions or move forward on those priorities. It's also a chance to sort of establish your baseline, and this could be determining what your KPIs are, so things that you want to keep track of over the years, and setting the foundation for what that may look like, regardless of how you're collecting that information. So maybe in your first year, it is a member survey where you're asking some sort of broad-based questions, as well as focusing on those strategic priority topics. Another important step that we suggest in year 1 is also setting up your segmentation framework. So this is understanding who your top priority audiences are, and really digging in when you do research to understand how those audiences are answering some of these questions, what their opinions and priorities are as well. And that's really important because it really helps set you up for year 2, where you can dive into more focused topics and conduct more focused studies. If you know what those priority areas are out of year 1, and you know what some of your priority audiences are, it's going to make it a lot easier to figure out what your focused studies can be as you're moving into year 2. This is also where we would suggest sort of building that central repository, whether that is, an individual in your organization that's responsible for helping to share out information, or if this is some sort of technology solution, whatever that looks like, figuring out what is best for your organization to make sure that not only is everybody aligned on what research is happening, but also how that information is being shared out and is being used in making decisions. And then year 3 is really an opportunity for you to explore new areas. You can use some of your research during this year to look back at your KPIs and see if there's any progress being made, make adjustments along the way of, if you have moved into new strategic goals or new priority areas that have come up over the last couple of years. But also, you may be going into a new strategic plan by this point. So maybe there's an opportunity to understand what the new priority areas are from your membership as well. I'll just go over this really quickly. We don't think that necessarily the structure of a research agenda needs to change based on whether your organization is a trade versus professional association. But we do see that some of the topics that are explored within your research agenda might be a little bit different. So, for example, professional associations may be more focused on member experience, understanding the value of and looking at trends that could be impacting the day-to-day of their members and within the profession, whereas trade groups might be more focused on understanding industry-wide trends and looking at what might be the market disruptors for their members or member companies, and whether maybe these members are impacted by things like policy changes or larger workforce impacts that are happening within their industry. So customizing your research priorities based on your association type really ensures relevance and strategic alignment to your overall priorities. I recognize that we are over on time right now. We're going to keep walking through some of these slides, but we're going to be on hand to help answer any questions if you all want to reach out and have a discussion with us about any of what we've talked about today. So how does this research agenda really support what Patrick was talking about earlier? Moving through the data maturity model and moving from that low maturity to data informed, and then eventually up to data optimized. Really, it helps associations move from that sort of ad hoc, disjointed data collection to a much more strategic and data-driven decision-making approach. It really ensures that there's consistency in what you're doing, whether that is how you're asking things, how many times you're going out to an audience, how many times you're talking about a particular topic with an audience. And that really also helps you to be able to track trends over time. You can look at your KPIs and make sure that you're on track with how you would like your strategic goals to be going. You can track industry trends over time and make sure that you are ahead of the game when it comes to things that are top of mind for your membership and for the industry that you're serving. It also, as Patrick alluded to as well, helps to break down those silos. You may have varying levels of comfort around data in your organization. And so if you are working to make sure that the entire organization is comfortable with it, you can have those that are very comfortable and knowledgeable working alongside those who maybe need a little bit of assurance or assistance in sort of getting to that place where they can be really data driven in any of their decision-making opportunities. It also helps to increase engagement and really the response quality that you get out of your members and your stakeholders. Instead of overwhelming them with, survey after survey after survey, by having these focused efforts where we are really asking them their input on maybe just one topic instead of 3 topics. They're much more likely to, 1, engage with that survey and give us information, but 2, to really be focused in on whatever that topic is, and give us data and information that is going to be of a higher quality to help make those decisions better. It also builds out some long-term value overall. So by setting up an agenda and continuously looking back at what information you have, what you've learned, and therefore what else you could be looking to add on to that, you're really refining your research efforts year over year. And this, again, like I mentioned, is going to help you really track trends better, track your progress on any priorities that you're looking at, and really be proactive about what your strategy overall could be by having this data year over year. So once you sort of decide that you're going to set up an agenda, how do you get started? One of the first things that I would say is really imperative is really assessing your data gaps. So understanding, what are you doing right now? What does it look like? How often are you conducting research? What topics have you conducted research on? What audiences have you reached out to? And then looking at your strategic priorities and helping to answer that question around, what questions, key questions do we want to answer right now? And what data can we collect to help answer those questions? And that's really going to help you sort of figure out initially what you're missing and what information you may need moving forward and help you build out that agenda overall. The centralized process is another area that, while we recommend that sort of in year 2, you can start thinking about that early on as well, by sort of taking a look at where data is stored right now, who is in charge of sharing things out. Is that one person? Are there multiple folks? Is it really nobody's job? And sort of understanding what that process looks like. Again, just uncover those gaps and figure out what that may look like moving forward to help get everybody on board with your data collection.
Okay, thank you, Candace.
Yep.
Uh, we are over, as Candace had mentioned. So what I want to do is just encourage you to hang on if you can, and we can have a little bit of a conversation. I would just ask you to share your questions in the Q&A. And if you need to leave, please be in touch, and we will make sure we reach out so we can have a discussion and answer any questions then. Candace, I do have a question for you, and hearing you talk through your slides.
Yep.
What do you feel are the biggest mistakes that associations tend to make when they're trying to implement data-driven decision making? And what would you recommend as a solution to that?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see often is when organizations are collecting, they're at the point where they're collecting data, whether that's through surveys or other methodologies, but they have a lot of data and no real clear purpose on what they're doing with that information. So maybe that looks like a member survey that they conduct annually, and maybe, they're asking the same questions year over year, but why? Why are they doing that? What is the reason behind collecting that information, and how is it being used to help inform, their strategic priorities, or even within different departments within the association? How is that information being used to help your staff do their jobs on a daily basis? And so, what I think can really help in situations like that is not just doing a survey, for example, just because you've always done a survey, but really taking that step back, like I mentioned, and thinking about your strategic priorities and how or what information you might need to move the needle on those priorities, and then setting up your research. So you're not just doing it to do it, but you're really setting out an intentional goal for each research effort that you conduct.
I really like that. I think a related point is that data and research can often minimize the risk in your decision making. It can help you make the right decision, but it doesn't necessarily give you the answer.
Yeah.
But if you start out knowing what your priorities are, what data you need, then you're going to struggle less when you get down the road, because you'll have the data you plan for, and you'll have a plan to have a conversation around that. And I think that can help get you there too.
Yeah.
One area I'm curious about, Candace, we both encounter this in our work. I know the folks on the call do as well. Survey fatigue. So how do you engage in a agenda like you had set out without burning out members from participating in research too many times or too many big kinds of efforts?
Yeah, that is something that I think across the board people struggle with. And one thing that I think is important to keep in mind when you are potentially encountering survey fatigue is that it's not just your surveys that folks are getting fatigue from. They are getting asked all the time, rate your experience at this restaurant, or fill out this survey to get $5 off your next, shopping experience. So folks are being asked for their opinions, their perceptions all the time from all different places. And so one of the things that's really helpful is to make sure that your surveys are really focused in. They are short and really to the point, that you're not just including questions in there because they're nice to know, but really you're only asking the questions and getting the information that you absolutely need to answer, whether that's for your strategic priorities or to inform some specific effort within your organization. And the other side of that too, I think, is thinking about your audience and your methodology for research in general. So I know you asked about survey fatigue, but there are other options than just sending out a survey to your entire membership or your entire database. If you are, wanting to understand why new members are not sticking around past their first year, you don't really need to send a large scale survey out to somebody that's been a member for 20 years. You can target in your audience, and you may get better insights from some qualitative efforts as well. So things like focus groups or interviews. It may not have to be a survey that you're sending out to really get some of that rich information.
Really good advice. Thank you, Candace. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I have a QR code up on the screen. If you're interested in connecting with us, we can help you talk about where you are in your data maturity and maybe some solutions for you. Please feel free to take a snapshot at that, and we'd be grateful to be in touch. Thank you for joining us.